All right. Today on For the Love of Sports, I have Derrell Jazz Johnson, sports and entertainment journalist. For over 10 years, interviews include Samuel Jackson, Giannis, Kobe, Magic, contributes to Rolling Out, AM New York, Harlem Times, Harlem News, covers the Knicks, Nets, Yankees, Mets, Jets. Where are the Giants, man? Why don't you cover the Giants?
A couple of reasons. A, I didn't grow up a Giant fan, and B, somebody at my paper pretty much locks the Giants games
Mm,
down.
all right.
So,
Sorry to hear that.
yeah, I'm not. It would be nice to do one to add it to the resume,
Hmm.
but outside of that, there's really no reason to do
Well, I'm crossing my fingers because you got my
it.
Mets on there, and hopefully you can get the Giants on there too, so you can have both my New York teams. But sincerely, man, thank you so much for hanging out today. How are you?
No problem. Thank you. I'm pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah.
Enjoying this quarantine life as much as I can. Windows open. Looks nice outside, but I'm staying in. So I don't know if it's really nice outside.
It is what it is. I'm up here in the Northeast as well. I'm in New Jersey. Got some sun shining. Yesterday was nice. Today was nice. This weekend is supposed to be beautiful. So
Yes,
hopefully you can get outside a little bit during the weekend, man. Well deserved.
I will take a long shopping supermarket trip on one of those 80-degree days. I
There we
will.
go, man. Enjoy the hell out of it. So, Jazz, the first question I have for everybody on the For the Love of Sports podcast is, why do you love sports so much?
Um. Wow, that's a good question.
Thanks.
As a kid, um, my mom passed away a little over, well, almost 8.5 years ago. But she was a tomboy growing up, and she was a huge sports fan. So as a kid, you tend to gravitate to the things that your parents like. My dad wasn't around, but my mom was a big sports fan. So I started watching sports with her. Um, Ironically, the first quote sport that I started watching was wrestling, which is technically not a real sport.
Like
But from the
WWE, WWF
Yeah,
wrestling? All right.
yeah.
Just want to make sure.
Um, so from there, I got into baseball, then football, then the NBA, and then it just took off. I started getting into boxing and tennis, and became a huge all around sports fan. As a young adult.
I love it, man. Same thing with me. I actually kind of have that route as well. My dad just never, he was a Chargers fan, San Diego Chargers fan growing up for whatever weird reason, but it was my mom who was much more into sports, and she's a huge baseball fan. So every day, pretty much for 180 days a year, there's a baseball game on in some capacity. And if it's not the Mets, if we're not rooting for the Mets, we're turning on the Yankees and rooting against the Yankees. So that was always fun too. Being here in the New York City area, it does help. And so I know you you were not in sports journalism immediately upon entering the workforce. I know there's kind of an interesting story there. We spoke about it before. So how did this opportunity, 10 years ago in 2010, how did this opportunity come about, and why did you jump at it, especially if it was something that you've never done before?
Well, I was volunteering for a charitable organization, and I met this gentleman who's a sports photographer at the event. We exchanged information, excuse me, and then a friend of mine who I grew up with, we've had sports debates for the last 30 years, um, and but he started working in the industry, so all of a sudden he had this air about him as if his opinion meant more because he worked for this company.
Hmm.
And I told him, the biggest personalities in sports are wrong. Oftentimes, what you do doesn't solidify your opinion. It's whether your opinion is right or wrong. So he challenged me to do like he did and get my opinion professionally heard. As a man who loves to take on a challenge, I then called up the sports photographer that I had met.
Hmm.
I proposed to him. We started a blog together. My writing, his photography. he gave me a test assignment. You know,
Mhm.
three sporting events that were going on. Write three opinion pieces. I did it. He enjoyed my writing. So not only did he agree to do the blog with me, which was called the Raz and Jazz Sports Blog. He's Raz, I'm Jazz, but he also hired me for the New York Beacon, which is a weekly African American newspaper. So I literally went from a Knicks fan my whole life in August to interviewing Mari Stoudemire in the NBA store in September. So it really was. I often tell people I was never a journalist. I never wanted to be a journalist until I was a journalist because I didn't have time to consider, hey, this is something I want to do. I was presented with an opportunity, and I jumped at it because if you're a lifelong sports fan, how would you not jump at the opportunity to cover the teams and the sports that you've loved your whole life?
It's such a cool it doesn't ever happen like that, right? I mean, like, only in New York City where there's, 18 teams you can cover and those
Absolutely.
types of opportunities, right?
Absolutely.
This isn't happening in, small towns in the middle of the country, unfortunately. And, as you said, you got the opportunity and you jumped at it. Was this first job, I mean, you started that blog and you kind of got hired from this newspaper. Was this enough to cover your bills? Was this a
Oh
full-time position?
no,
Right? No.
no,
So I
no.
guess at what point did you finally, I guess, so you start there, you're covering the Knicks, as you said, you go from a full-time fan in August to interviewing Amari Stoudemire in September, which is a great way of putting it too. So I appreciate the analogy there. But what, not analogy, but I don't remember whatever the word is. But what, like, how did you eventually, how did you know this was the right career path for you once you started trying it and once you started to get it ingrained deeper and deeper into the culture and the industry?
Well, I remember. So I started in September 2010. By a little over a year later, um, I started saying to myself, "Self, you never played professional sports, but you're able to write about sports professionally." I studied music for 10 years.
Hmm.
No, I studied acting for 11 years. I said, if you can write about sports without having played sports professionally, then you should be able to write about music and acting and theater and stuff like that. So that's when I began exploring more opportunities writing about other things. Ironically, or as fate would have it, I explored those opportunities at the New York Beacon.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, and I love the guy, but the guy who's the entertainment editor there is very possessive over his, entertainment section. So that was a no go. He took my card to be polite, and after I dropped a couple of names, he was definitely impressed. But he was like, "Okay, I'll take your card." But
Hmm.
I truly believe he had no intention of using me in that capacity. So I started to look for opportunities elsewhere. The first opportunity that I I got, well, the first segue to an opportunity in entertainment came with SNY Net. So
Hmm.
so the TV station SNY created a Nets blog called SNYNets.com when the Nets moved to Brooklyn. So I spoke to the editor about, when Barclays Center opened, Jay-Z opened the building with 8 concerts. So he said, what would be a good idea if you went to a concert and spoke to the fans there wearing Brooklyn Nets gear
Hmm.
and find out why they're wearing it. It was a good idea. That's what I did, and I found out that people were wearing, some said when in Rome do what Romans do.
Hmm.
Some said well, I grew up a Knicks fan or a Bulls fan, but since there's a team here, I'm going to support them. There were some people who said the same thing that weren't really NBA fans, but they said I'm a Brooklyn fan,
Hmm.
so I'm going to support what comes in Brooklyn. So that was my first kind of like taste of a mixture between sports and entertainment. Loved it. Um, my next big opportunity came with the Harlem Times, um, and I covered at Alicia Keys and Miguel concert at Barclays Center. Great time writing about it, and that just got the ball rolling on the entertainment side.
Hmm.
And I love both equally. It depends on what's going on, whether I would choose the sporting event or the entertainment event. But um, to me, that's like the best of both worlds, having
Yeah.
the opportunity to do both.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be so much fun. As you said, you studied music for a while, you studied acting, you've always loved sports. I mean, if you could write about the things that you've enjoyed all of your life, sounds like the perfect job, man, right? And a
Absolutely.
perfect career, even better than that. So I guess how long did it take to phase out your full-time job to allow you and how did you do it too? Was it through the relationship building? Was it just through the sheer hard work? I'm sure there's a combination and there's an algorithm for it, but what was that timeline like? And what did you have to do to get to the point where you could say, okay, I don't need to do a job I don't want to do anymore. I can really focus on this new career.
Well, and like you said, it was a combination of those two things. Um, Networking is key. I remember specifically this gentleman who was a friend of mine now. He saw me covering the Atlantic 10 tournament and he saw me covering the Big East tournament. So he came up to me. He said, "I don't know you, but I've seen you every day this week covering both tournaments." So I said, "I have to come over here and meet you." I met quite a few people that way because they didn't recognize my face, but I was in there like the daily guys.
Hmm.
So some people covering sports for weekly or smaller publications. The game starts at 7:30. They'll show up at 7:25. The game ends at 10. They're out the door at 10:05. Me,
Oh no. Jazz. Oh no, everybody. I think we lost
an
him.
hour and
Oh,
okay.
oh, you're back. Okay, cool.
I would
Uh,
I
After
would do
10:05, what would you do before and after a game? That's where I lost you.
oh so instead of the people that leave at 10:05, I would show up to the game hour and 45 minutes before the start because that's when the coach speaks. I would do the locker room pregame. I would do the coach after the game. I would do at least one locker room after the game.
Mhm.
If I could get into both locker rooms, I would do both locker rooms after the game. So people would see me like, you know, I don't know this guy, but he's here all the time.
Mhm.
He's working hard. So they would, introduce themselves. So that's how I networked, and it wasn't really me trying to network. It was people recognizing my hard work
Mhm.
and introducing themselves. Um, that has enabled me to create an amazing network in the sporting industry that helps me to this day. And I started the foundation just by working hard.
I love it, man. And I mean, I guess that's networking, hard working, smart working. There's a couple different workings in there, and you kind of have to have a combination of all of them. And it seems like you've been able to hit the nail on the head, hit the nail on the head for a few of them. So, I mean, I know you've had the opportunity to interview some incredible people, cover some incredible events. Let's start with the interviews, though. We talked a little bit about the events. We'll get back to that. Where and how did you develop your skill to interview people? Because it's taken me a little while to feel comfortable on camera or feel comfortable in front of another person. And like, probably it's taken about 2 years for me to get to where I am and almost 300 interviews at this point. But how long did it, like, what did you do and how long did it take, especially in that situation where you're kind of you're fighting for people? As you said, you're in a locker room, you're going to the coach. It's a way different situation than you and I. We already talked once and we're already a little comfortable with each other. What was it like kind of getting your feet wet on the job at that point?
Honestly, that's where studying acting comes in. because if I'm nervous, then I gotta psych myself up. You know, you need to be assertive. You need to, if Derrell is not going to cut it, you need to create this character Jazz, who's confident, who's assertive, who speaks loudly so people can hear him. Because sometimes, perfect example. This was All Star NBA All Star Weekend last year in Charlotte. Dwayne Wade. I'm being patient, letting other people ask questions, and then they say last question. I start speaking. Another guy starts speaking. We both stop. We both started again. We both stopped. Finally, the third time, I was the only person that started and asking my question. And it's not about winning or losing, but you do have to be assertive.
Hmm.
If you're not assertive in situations, especially when it's a scrum, especially when it's a huge event like NBA All Star Weekend, where there's media from all over the world, literally. You're never going to get your questions across if you're not assertive.
Hmm.
So I have that mentality that I need to be assertive to get my questions across. But I've also had enough respect to say, you're not with the Daily News or the New York Times or the New York Post. So, or ESPN. So don't ask the first question or the second question or the third question. Let the daily beat writers get their questions in first, and then you jump in. And that's what I do, and that's a formula that has worked for me for 10 years.
Yeah. Keep doing it because you're killing it. So appreciate that. And that's really interesting. I didn't realize that there was kind of, I don't want to say a pecking order, but there's kind of a culture to this and understanding like, hey, like the Daily News, ESPN, they're gonna get millions of clicks or whatever that is. You'll get your questions in. You have to be assertive. But I like the story that you tell with Dwayne Wade and really understanding that aspect. So it's pretty interesting. And I guess how did you like learn, for lack of a better term, how'd you learn how to ask questions and understand what was a good question versus what's kind of pedestrian and doesn't really need to be asked, can be inferred? Like, how did you go about that process as well? Because I know, again, in the beginning, I was terrible at interviewing. Not to say I'm great at it now, but I've definitely gotten better over time and understand where some questions can be asked and others can be held off.
Well, Mark Raspberry, excuse me, who passed away, unfortunately in 2016. But when he hired me, he told me, he said, "Okay, I know you know a lot about sports, but now you're going to be around people who also know a lot about sports too. So if you're going to ask a question, make sure it's a good question." And I always remembered that. So when I think of a question, I don't necessarily instinctively ask it. I replay it in my head. Like, is that a good question? Can I ask a better question? Can I ask this question in a better way? So that's like a mental process that I go
Mhm.
through before I ask a question. And it suits me well. Have I, asked some, maybe not foolish, but have I asked some later? Like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have asked that.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But I also, ask some questions where, I really watch the video and I say, you know what, that was a really good question.
Yeah,
2011 Derrell had it going on. That was a good question.
there we
So,
go.
um, you know, I give a lot of it. The funny thing about it is, I became a journalist in 2010, and I didn't study journalism, but it's almost like everything I did leading up to it prepared me for it. You know, I
Mhm.
didn't study acting to become an actor, um, but that helped me, as a journalist. Um, I've been a proofreader and copy editor before. knowing how to correct someone else's writing actually helps you be able to write
Hmm.
indirectly. So those things from my past prepared me um, for my journalism career without knowing it was preparing me for it.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, you're able to draw upon your past, as you said, and be able to start being able you're able to then turn it into something. And again, it was a cool thing. You started a blog, you got a little beat, hanging out, and then you were able to, as you said, just continue to work and network and find ways to get to more events and meet more people and start asking better questions to the point where now this is, it's been your full-time career for a little while. And I always just, just again, some of the gigs that you've done, being in New York City, how much more opportunity do you think comes with Madison Square Garden, Barclays Center, the New York Yankees, the Jets, the Giants, the US Open? Like how much more opportunity comes to New York City, especially on the worldwide stage, talking about UFC and boxing as well. How do you take advantage of those situations, and how do you put yourself in a position to take advantage of those situations?
Well, with New York City being the backdrop of my career is the key. For example, Magic Johnson, when I interviewed him, Magic was courtside for a NCAA tournament game. Michigan State was playing. Me and another mentor who passed away. Sad story, but he's a cameraman. I'm the guy who asked the questions. We went up to Magic. He introduced himself. I introduced myself. Hi, Magic. I'm a fellow Johnson, Derrell Johnson. Uh, Thinking foolishly that that would count for something. Oh, he's a Johnson. Sure, we'll do the interview. Um, but he actually said to my partner, "Who are you?" Because he asked if we can interview him. He said, "Who are you?" Then he looks at me, and who are you? Then he says, "Okay." And it's Magic Johnson. And he only gave us 90 seconds, but it was a good 90 seconds. And again, it's Magic Johnson. He's one of the most recognizable people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that does not happen if it's not New York City.
Mm-hmm.
The A-list stars in New York City are the A-list stars of the world. If I'm in Atlanta, which I have covered sporting events in Atlanta, no, the A-list stars in Atlanta, no offense to Atlanta, are B and C list stars here. When they
Mm-hmm.
show celebrities on the Jumbotron, those people aren't making the Jumbotron at MSG.
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um
Yeah,
so
that's a pretty good point. I've been to a few Rangers games, and the Hadids, Bella and Gigi, are always
mhm.
there, and they're always on the jumbotron. Yeah, you make a good point.
And I'll take it a step further, and I love Barclays Center and the people over there. So I don't mean this in a disrespectful way. The stars at the Garden and the stars at Barclays Center, big difference.
Hmm.
The stars that go to Knicks and Rangers games and the stars that go to Nets and Islanders games is a big difference.
Hmm.
Maybe that'll change next season when Kyrie and Durant are playing together, because stars like winners and they
Hmm.
like other stars.
Yep.
Stars like other stars. But all things being equal, people want to be at the world's most famous arena, and that's Madison Square Garden.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it just again, it gives so much opportunity, as you said. A Michigan State game. Why are Michigan State playing? Because it's the NCAA tournament, and they want to play at one of these two arenas here in New York. Again, I know you covered UFC 205, if I'm not mistaken. You covered some
Absolutely.
gigantic, boxing events. Again, just the world's most famous arena. I think it's a given title, but I do think it is one of the most famous arenas in New York City, in the world, and it's not even really a question. And I mean, I guess so. How with covering all these teams, with covering all these events, one question I asked you when we had our quick phone call before this conversation, going from fan to, as you had the story before, you went from a fan in August to interviewing the star player in September. Being in sports media, one thing I hear a lot is it's not, while you used to love the sport because you'd sit down at your house or you'd hang out with your friends and you talk about the game and you do all that. Now you turned it into a job. Now you turned it into a career. So you don't get to have as much fun. You can't clap in the press box, a lot of these things. How did you handle going from fan to, not saying needing to be professional, but turning it, rather than from a fan perspective, into now an objective journalistic perspective? Have you still been able to enjoy the sports as much, or is it just a different way of enjoying them?
Absolutely, but it's a different way of enjoying it. Um, you enjoy quality athletics.
Hmm.
So and when I started, I enjoyed everything because everything was new. Um, you know, Now that I've been doing it 10 years, would I get excited about the Memphis Grizzlies coming to New York?
Hmm.
No, not really. Would I get excited about the Lakers coming? Absolutely. Um, so there's a difference there in terms of the excitement level. I'm not as excited for every single game,
Hmm.
but I try not to overlook how special this opportunity is. I try not to overlook the fact that you know I am at Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena, covering events that people all over the country and sometimes the world are
Hmm.
watching. I'm privileged. There are people that pay hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars to be there, and I'm getting paid to be there. So that's a blessing.
Absolutely. I think the perspective of that and understanding, you were going to watch the game anyway.
Hmm.
You like writing, now you get to interview the players, you get to interview the front office, you get that firsthand knowledge and firsthand experience. Why not, right? That just sounds like it's more
Absolutely.
fun. Like, I totally agree. You get to be there. You get paid. You get to interview these athletes and these people, and it sounds like you're taking a lot of advantage of it, man. I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. If you had told me in August 2010 this is what I would be doing 10 years from now, I would have said, you're out of your mind.
Hmm.
Oh, I also would have said that about this pandemic.
That's
But here
another
we
good point.
are.
Yeah.
Here
Yes.
we are.
Here we are, and with no sports going on, what have you been doing? How have you been able to kind of keep the articles rolling and keep the content getting out there?
I'm actually, it is in a weird kind of way. My journalism career has been flourishing in this pandemic. I started writing for an outlet called Dubrio. I wrote my first piece for them at the end of March, and again, it's all about relationships. A DJ by the name of D Nice has
Hmm.
uh, made a lot of noise because he's routinely drawing tens of thousands of people to watch him DJ on Instagram Live, and you know draws a lot of celebrities as well, including Michelle Obama and Diddy, and Jennifer Lopez, Drake, Rihanna, just ridiculous names. So I know him. Um, so when I saw this thing really taking off, I said, "Let me check it out." I checked it out. I'm like, this is kind of cool. I can see why people were talking about it on social media and got excited about it. It's kind of cool. So I pitched the story to the Griot. Now I've been pitching stories to them since late last year, and pretty regularly. So December, January, February, March, April, pitching stories. I had started to get responses from one woman who was there, but she left.
Of course.
so so it looked like I was getting closer to landing something, and then she's gone. I stopped getting responses. But the day I sent the D Nice pitch, I also sent you know 3 or 4 other pitches in the same email. They shot all of those down, but they accepted the D Nice pitch. Um, wrote the story. The story did well, and from there, I've been pitching stories to them, and they've actually been accepting quite a few of them. And the the niche that I've seemed to have found is COVID-19 related stories, but indirectly.
Hmm.
So the DJ is playing music on Instagram Live because of the pandemic.
Hmm.
And I wrote a story about a woman that I went to school with who chose to spend the pandemic in Morocco instead of the US. And I wrote a story about an Olympic fencer who unfortunately was called a racial slur on a Zoom meeting that was scheduled because of the pandemic.
And Zinga,
So,
correct?
yes, yes.
Zinga Prescott.
So,
I know her. She's incredible.
oh wow, okay.
Hmm.
Well, small world. Um, so that has become my niche. Not writing about COVID-19, but writing about stuff
Hmm.
that COVID-19 has influenced.
Hmm.
And so far so good. I wrote a story for them Thursday, two on Saturday, and one on Sunday. So that
All right.
is my best week thus far. I'm not going to equal that this week, I don't think, and maybe ever. But just the fact that um, I feel like I'm they're allowing me to grow as a journalist and
Hmm.
find my voice by speaking about relevant things because I love sports. But at the end of the day, this stuff is more important than sports is.
Yeah.
So it gives you a greater sense of accomplishment to be writing about events like that
Hmm.
as opposed to sports.
And so you bring up a good point. This is you're still kind of finding your voice as a journalist. You've been doing this for 10 years. I mean, you're not classically trained, as we found out. You kind of started doing this for fun. What has it been like to learn? I mean, everybody should be learning about themselves in some capacity every passing year, right? But especially being in this career now only for 10 years, um, what has it been like to kind of find yourself in situations like this where you're able to learn more about yourself and your voice and what you're interested in writing in, considering you started in sports, then you went into music and entertainment, and now you're talking about just relevant worldly topics. Like how does that process work for someone like yourself?
Well, it's funny. I think it was earlier this week, but a woman that I went to school with, she's a journalist at the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Hmm.
So she's I went to NYU's business school undergrad. She was in journalism school. Um, I was talking to her about my career and the success I'm having in the pandemic, and I forgot what I said to her. And she's also a professor,
Hmm.
so she knows her stuff. Um, She says journalism is 60% instincts, 30% writing skills, and 10%, you know, uh, efficiency in terms of how quickly you can meet deadlines, especially for daily papers, but
Hmm.
for websites as well, and even for weekly papers because everybody has a deadline. Whether your deadline is
Hmm.
once a day, once a week, once a month. Everybody has a deadline in journalism, um, and I think I've been blessed with good journalistic instincts. Um, I'm also a good listener, so that helps. You know, Sometimes you hear interviews and somebody answers a question that they weren't asked, but the person is just reading questions down
Hmm.
a piece of paper and they ask a question that has already been answered. You know, if you're listening to the interview,
Hmm.
that question has just been answered. Sometimes the person who asked the question will say, "I just answered that." No, it makes you look bad
Hmm.
because you're not listening. So I'm definitely blessed with those instincts in terms of spreading my wings journalistically. Honestly, if I'm inspired to write about something, I'm going to enjoy writing about it.
Hmm.
So that can be sports, that can be entertainment. If it's a political story that I'm inspired to write, you know, for example, I wrote about, there was a Facebook group that was supporting the two men who murdered the man
Hmm.
jogging in Georgia in February. This group changed its name. It had about 8,000 people in it, and in a day, it went from 8,000 people to 108,000 people. And that was absolutely disgusting to me that people are openly supporting those two men when you see him murder a guy on video. So I reached out to my editor about it, and he said, "You know what? Somebody told us about GoFundMe pages for these guys too. Here's the information they sent us. Combine that with your
Hmm.
Facebook findings, write a story. We have a statement from GoFundMe. Reach out to Facebook, get a statement from them." I did it, and I didn't really realize how quickly I turned the story around. But he gave
Hmm.
me the assignment Friday night. I turned it in Saturday morning. Um, but I was inspired to write it, and that's not what I usually write about.
Hmm.
But I saw something that I didn't like, and I decided to use my voice to voice my displeasure about it.
Hmm. Yeah, and as you said before, sports aren't really that important. Those types of topics are a little bit more important in the world. Obviously, sports are it's a child's game, right? I grew up playing baseball. I played it as a 7 year old. It doesn't really matter what happens. There is a lot of money on the line, but as you said, stories like those about that gentleman down in Georgia, or those gentlemen, all parties involved, those stories are a little bit more important. And as you said, also the stories around surrounding COVID-19 and the pandemic and what comes out of it, or how it is affecting people, also much more important than basketball not being played. Well, as much as we want basketball back, I want to see those
Yes, we
playoffs.
want it. Yes.
As you said, it's a little different. And so you kind of went into the topic before a little bit. How are you a freelance journalist
Yes.
or okay,
I
cool.
I freelance for every publication I write for.
So you brought it up before with the Griot, if I'm not mistaken. You kind of go to them and you pitch them story ideas. Being a freelance journalist, how does that push you more? Not really knowing where your next paycheck's coming from, or
Absolutely.
how does that like whole process work, and how do you cope with it? Knowing again, not knowing really what's coming next.
You got to be self-motivated, because I do get assigned stories sometimes, but the majority of what I write are stories that I
Hmm.
pitch. So if I'm not pitching stories, I'm not writing a lot of
Hmm.
stories. If I'm not writing a lot of stories, I'm not getting paid. I'm dipping into the savings, and
Hmm.
that I'm not the other Jazz Johnson. Um, so that wouldn't work out well for me. Um, so and at the same time, there's a motivation for when I'm inspired to write about something, I'm motivated to get my thoughts across.
Hmm.
So I have idea for a story. I want as many people to read it as possible. So I'm motivated to pitch it, and I told a friend, I was giving him advice on pitching. You don't have to pitch them to the point where they say, "Hey, this is a good story idea," because if it's a generic good story idea, they can just say, "I'm going to assign somebody on my
Hmm.
staff to write it. I don't need you to write the story." So your pitch has to not only be a good story, but you also have to pitch why you are the person to write the story. So for example, for me with the grill, how the relationship began, D Nice was the hottest thing on the planet that week. He the week I jokingly told people the week I interviewed him, he did interviews with Oprah Winfrey, Gayle King, Trevor Noah, uh, Jimmy Fallon, and Derrell Jazz Johnson. You know, and
It's a good
you
list to
know,
be a part of, man. Not
yeah,
too bad.
and I sold it on. He's the biggest thing right now. I know him. I have his personal telephone number, so I can call him and get an interview. And when I pitched that, did I know that I could call him and get an interview? No, I believed that I could. And I'm embarrassed to say how many times I had to call him to actually land an interview because every time I called him and he would answer the phone, he was about to do an interview with somebody else.
Mhm.
That was more important to me. I'm not foolish enough to know, oh, tell Jimmy Fallon to wait. Give me my
Yeah, right?
10 minutes. No, it's like, come on. I'll call you back when you're free, you know. And persistence and hard work, landed me that interview and that opened door to what is starting a beautiful relationship between me and the grill.
That's awesome, man. And yeah, it's always very interesting to me, kind of the freelance world and how it works. And, I know some people that freelance on top of their, full-time jobs, let's
Hmm.
call it. But it sounds like you're just a full-time freelancer, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And,
And
kudos to you, man. That is very impressive.
thank you. But um, I used to be a proofreader and copy editor for law firms and um, investment banking firms. That's not fun,
No,
you know.
just saying that sounded boring.
Yeah, because it is. That's not now. There was not social media to the extent that it is
Mhm.
now when I was doing it. But I'm not gonna take selfies in my cube like, oh, 150-page document. Like that's boring. Nobody wants to see that.
Mhm.
And not that I'm doing it for what people want to see. I don't want to see that. you know, I do it because it was paying the bills, but I didn't want to see a 150-page document.
Mhm.
I didn't. You know, um, so I actually enjoy what I do now, and that's one of the things I try to get across when I talk to kids or young adults. While you're young, find out what it is that you love to do with your free time and then figure out a way to get paid doing it, because if you can, you're living a dream. You're literally living a dream. I'm a guy who used to pay to go to Knicks games or watch Knicks on TV, and now I'm covering them. I
Mhm.
get to talk to players, and that's living a dream. So I always encourage people to try to do that. And it happened for me later in life. It didn't happen to me when I was a teenager or in my 20s, but it happened to me when I was in my 30s. It's never too late. You could be in your 40s and begin living your dream. And some people have. Samuel L. Jackson, somebody who I've interviewed before. I didn't know he was as old as he is either, but he didn't really make it big as an actor until he was in his 40s.
Mhm.
So I admire people like him who never give up on their dreams.
Absolutely. It's important, man. I mean, I think it's one of those things where, I will say when you're a teenager, 20 sounds old. And now that I'm 28,
Hmm.
40 does sound a little old. I'm not gonna lie to you. But no, I mean it is interesting how perspective changes everything and really understanding. At 22, I was in one career. I was actually in finance. Hated that, got out of that, and now I'm loving what I'm doing. So it's definitely a little bit different, but really getting your wheels turning and understanding, as you said, there you can make money doing anything. If you work hard
Absolutely.
enough, you'll be able to make enough money, and if you continue to work hard, you'll be able to make a lot of money. and you'll be able to love it the whole time too, especially if you do it right. So kudos to you, man. And yeah, again, you've interviewed some very, very cool people. I noticed Kobe was on that list as well. I mean, who has been your favorite interview so far that you've been able to do?
Hmm. Um, I've interviewed Magic Johnson a couple of
Hmm.
times,
Okay.
and for a star to be as big as Magic Johnson is, he's so open.
Hmm.
Um, you know, there are some people you see them on TV and you meet them and they're totally different. And then there's some people that you see on TV and you get a chance to speak to them and they're exactly how you imagine they were.
Hmm.
That's Magic.
That's awesome.
He's great personality, does not shy away from tough questions. I interviewed him November 2018, I believe, second time I interviewed him. And I asked him a LeBron question, you know, and he gave me a great answer. Um, and honestly, I expected him to maybe backpedal a little bit
Hmm.
or dance around it. Mm-mm. Came straight for it with a great answer. That's Magic Johnson.
That's awesome.
Um, so he's definitely at the top of the list. Um, Other sports people, the the great the greats, Serena,
Hmm.
being able to, I've covered the U.S. Open since 2011. Um, so that means minus the 1 year she was pregnant, I've seen her every year at the U.S. Open. And seeing arguably the greatest women's tennis
Hmm.
player play is a blessing. And being able to ask her questions is remarkable. Um, Serena can be intimidating.
Hmm.
So I always have this questions if Serena's in a good mood, questions if Serena's in a bad mood.
Uh-huh. I love it, man.
Because
That's
Serena's in a bad mood, no, you do not want to
mm-mm.
ask her a tough question. She'll bite your head off. I've seen it. I've seen it in person. I'm sure you've seen it.
Mhm.
Um, it wouldn't be a good feeling to be on the other end of that, and I try not to do that. I asked her a question about her shirt one time, and she questioned me about my question. She says, "You didn't know what shirt I was going to wear. So, what question were you going to ask if you didn't ask that question?" And I'm thinking, what?
Yeah,
Did Serena Williams just ask me a question?
that's kinda cool.
As a journalist, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, am I supposed to ask it? This is not supposed to be about me, but it's Serena Williams. You know, Unfortunately, I could not remember what that question was, and I was a little flustered by
Mhm.
Serena Williams asking me a question. So I didn't say anything, and she just answered my question. But you know, LeBron, you know, a, one of the greatest NBA players of all time, an even better person off the court. When
Mhm.
you see all he does in the philanthropic acts that he does, and I remember my first year covering the NBA. Um, the next third game of the season that year, when they played at Prudential Center, was against the Miami Heat, and this is one of the first handful of NBA games I'm covering. I definitely wasn't at number 10.
Mhm.
It wasn't number one, but it was, 4, 5, 6, somewhere there. Pre-game, I asked LeBron a question. My first time talking to him. He looks at me in the eyes and answers my question. I was a bit starstruck in the moment because
Mhm.
I'm like, LeBron James is looking at me answering my question. Like
That
I,
gotta be
I'm recording it,
Mhm.
so I had the
Yeah.
audio. I did not hear what he said. I didn't. He could have called me a name.
Hmm.
I wouldn't have heard it because I was just in shock. You know,
Hmm.
being in that position from being the fan in August to in April interviewing LeBron James. Um, I'm trying to think of.
Well, so on that point, how long did it take you to get over that feeling of being starstruck?
Um, it happened pretty quickly.
Hmm.
I'm a weird guy. I get starstruck over people that most people wouldn't get starstruck over,
I
especially now.
think LeBron and
Um,
Serena are two pretty good ones that you could get starstruck over.
absolutely, and those are names that most people would, but other people on that list for me would be Hulk Hogan and Bobby Brown.
Love it.
And both of them, their better days were decades ago.
Hmm.
But still, you know, I saw Bobby Brown at a Tribeca Film Festival event a couple of years ago. I'm like, oh my God, Bobby Brown. I've been a fan of his since I was a teenager.
Hmm.
Um, but honestly, when I was interviewing Amara Stoudemire, I was not starstruck. You know, so for the most part, it doesn't bother me. I
Hmm.
would have to be a big fan of somebody to be starstruck, and as I've you know done more in the industry,
Hmm.
I just block it out my head.
Yeah.
I may get starstruck after, but not in the moment. In
Hmm.
the moment, I stay focused.
I love it. That's good stuff, man. Jazz, this was awesome.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the time today. I appreciate all the stories, all the people we got to talk to, some cool numbers in your phone. I'm assuming I won't ask you who the most famous one is, but Derrell Jazz Johnson, sports and entertainment journalist for over 10 years. Really appreciate your time today, man. Thank you so much.